Hold up. All right, so who went home and like immediately noticed a fallacy somewhere? At least one of the ones we've already talked about. Which ones did we talk about? What?
I found something on Twitter the other day that made me think of this stuff.
It's your first problem.
This girl tweeted, "We just smile because sometimes words aren't the right words to say." But she used words to say.
Well, that's not technically self-defeating. Why? That's not.
She said sometimes. She's not making it absolute.
Right. She.
Only smiling.
Yeah, I'm glad though. I'm proud of you that you actually even thought about that, right?
I read it and I was like, oh.
Right, because like Piper said, she's not saying all, like sometimes, you know, so meaning that it allows the possibility that for whatever she's saying right then is one of those sometimes, right? It's what you have to be careful of is when somebody makes some sort of absolute claim, right? Because that's when they're usually going to disqualify themselves if they're trying to exclude absolutes or objective type statements, right? But I'm glad you were thinking about it. That's a good thing. All right, so we've got through all this stuff. Oh, and I made a major gaffe I need to tell you guys about the other day. We were trying to remember we were just ramrodding through all this, all just all these distinctions. Right, all this, like this right here, all this. When we were doing that, I guess it's because I was trying to go through it so quickly. I included, really what I did was there's a form of argument in the deductive sense. And I'm just saying, you know, this is just for your own, so you know. And the deductive, what falls under a deductive argument is a modus tollens and a modus ponens, which are the way of negation and the way of affirmation. And I called those hypothetical syllogisms because they're if-then statements, right? Technically, a hypothetical syllogism is a little different than that. A modus ponens and a modus tollens, that's just Latin for when you say if then and then you say then, or you affirm something, you affirm the antecedent, that's called a modus ponens, because just think of it this way, ponens is positive, you're affirming something. Modus tollens is when you negate something, the way of negation. Hypothetical syllogism is a little different than that, even though it's still an if-then type statement. So just so you know, just so you don't somewhere down the road screw up. Probably don't even, you won't remember that anyway, so just don't worry about it. Anyway, I just wanted to clear that up for honesty's sake. All right, so we got through all of this. Let's get back to our informal fallacies. Now, why are we kind of concentrating on informal fallacies in our introduction to logic, and not necessarily all the rule type stuff? Does anybody remember why? Does anybody remember? Does anybody remember? So we got through this. All right, so all right, where were we? Did we do this? Argumentum ad baculum?
Yes.
All right. Argumentum ad hominem?
We did. I don't think we did. Did we cover it eventually?
Yeah, we did this because remember we talked about like.
We ended on genetic fallacy.
Okay. All right, so we did argumentum ad hominem, which is similar to genetic fallacy, right? Now, did we get to genetic fallacy, or did we end right before we talked about it? Okay, so we didn't talk about genetic fallacy much. Now, yeah, I remember we mentioned it because remember when we were going through our stuff that we had written on the board about, you know, do you believe this for whatever reason? And does that mean it's false because you believe it for whatever reason? Does that mean the conclusion is false? So again, let's say that, or you guys tell me, what would be an example of the genetic fallacy?
Something I heard a lot growing up, I guess. Like, I'm a Baptist because my mom was a Baptist, my grandma was a Baptist. It was like that's the only reason. Like Like that's like the main reason they gave, and it's kind of like not a strong enough reason in itself, because it could just be like their tradition is wrong, you know.
All right, so you're on the right track. So, but now if someone were to turn and say what, that would be an example of the genetic fallacy.
Yeah.
If they were to turn and say what? If someone were to say to that person that the implication being that their belief is wrong, right? That would be an example of the genetic fallacy. So again, like when we were going through the board, is that a strong reason in and of itself to hold to some particular belief because your mama said so? No.
But it could be wrong, and it could be right.
Right. But if someone were to try to say, so therefore your belief is wrong because, well, the only reason you believe that is because your mama said so. Well, if they're trying to say that the belief is wrong, well, that's an example of the genetic fallacy.
Oh, okay.
Why?
Because why you believe something doesn't necessarily mean it's right or wrong.
Why you believe something has nothing to do with the ontological status of the belief itself, right? The status could be true or false. Why you believe it, you could have the worst possible reason on the planet to believe whatever the belief is. But it still doesn't mean the belief itself is false, right? And we can see that because that's a double-edged sword, right? So if someone were to say, oh, the only reason you're, a Baptist or whatever is because your parents were Baptist and you were raised Baptist and all that, and you therefore imply that, that denomination or whatever is wrong, well, that's the genetic fallacy because it could be right. They may have no good reason as to why they should believe it, but it still could be right. Now, the flip side of that, the way we can see that that's how that's not a good way to, or why that's fallacious, why the genetic fallacy is a misstep in reasoning, because you could turn that around and say what? You could say the exact opposite. What could you say? Say the Baptist guy could say what to the person saying that to him?
Like, oh, you're only like say atheist, like you're only atheist because you're into.
Right. You're right.
You're right.
Right. You're just an atheist because you're brainwashed your whole life to that certain worldview, right? And then, but that doesn't mean what?
That is wrong.
That is true or false either, right? Because remember, what's the point of all these fallacies? They always divert you away from what? Right, the issue at hand, right? Because the issue at hand, let's say that you're debating, the Baptist denomination or, just God in general. The issue is what? Right, whether or not God exists and the reasons for holding that belief, right? The issue is not why you believe what?
Why you believe it, right?
Right, the issue is not why you believe it, and the issue is not why you disbelieve it. The issue is what are your arguments for it, right? What are your arguments against it, right? Something like that. Why I get up, take the pen off, and not write anything on the board. So what's a less controversial example of the genetic fallacy? Because remember what I point out, or tried to point out Thursday, that the ad hominem circumstantial, and this fallacy are probably what you're going to see the most of on a daily basis, if not, or at least weekly, if not daily basis. What's another example of the genetic fallacy? You guys. What if someone said, let's use another controversial example, but I mean, not like as controversial. But what if someone says, well, you believe that because you watch CNN all day long? Well, that may be why you believe it, right? But if the implication is it's false, that's the example of what? Genetic fallacy, because you may hate CNN, right? But they still could tell the truth about whatever that particular thing is, right? You'd have to see that for other reasons. Again, the flip side. Well, yeah, the reason you believe that is because you watch Fox News all day long.
The worst thing is that it's non-controversial. That's what we killed it.
Right. So what could happen? Still be true, right? Just because Fox News said it, what? All right, doesn't mean it's false. It could still be true, right? You have to what? Judge the issue for what? Right. You have to judge the issue on its own merit, right? You have to look at the reasons for or against it. If you hold all your beliefs because some talking head on Fox News says something, they could still be true, right? If you hold your beliefs because some talking head on CNN says something, they could still be what? They could still be true. Right? See, these are examples you'll see every day. I hear college professors say it all the time. Hey, man, you need to turn it off, whatever news channel, and watch this, and then maybe you wouldn't be such an idiot, or maybe you wouldn't believe all that stuff. Like genetic fallacy. It's irrelevant, right? Again, because what are these fallacies? What do we just say? They're what? Word I just used. Right. Distractions, they're irrelevant. It's irrelevant, but that stuff passes as persuasive in our culture, right? Even among the intelligentsia, right?
What's it like saying even a broken clock is right twice a day?
Right. So you have to at least look at, is there a reason for it to be right in that sense, right? Now, that's actually another informal fallacy called cliche. Why is that a fallacy? We'll just go ahead and skip to that one. Why is it a fallacy to use a cliche to prove an argument? What's that? Well, no, not necessarily because they're always used. There's almost always what in regards to cliches? A counter cliche, right? So what if someone says, hey, man, you ought to do this. Why should I do it? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Or what if he asks the next guy, hey, man, why should I do this? Says, hey, I wouldn't do it. Better safe than sorry. You see what I'm saying? Those are two exactly opposite cliches that say the exact same thing to the same guy in the same situation, but they imply the same thing. One says do it, one says don't do it, right? So you can't use a cliche, what? To prove an argument, right? You have to use what to prove an argument? Reasons, right? You have to give reasons, right? So we'll skip cliche when we get there. All right, so tu quoque, this is also another one you'll hear all the time. Tu quoque is just roughly Latin for you too, right? Not the band U2, but like as in like also, right? So you also. Now, what do you think an example of this fallacy would be? You hear this. It's so easy to use these on like religion and politics because these are just the topics you hear them almost all the time used on and in regard to. So what's an example of you also fallacy? What's an example? It's essentially the hypocrite fallacy, right? What do I mean by that? You too, you also. What do I mean by that? This is my wife's favorite fallacy. What do I mean? We'll just call it, so you understand it better, the hypocrite fallacy. What is an example of that?
Pointing out that somebody else does the exact same thing to criticize you.
Or saying that they don't do what? They don't do it, right? So let's say I'm like, all right, look, guys, for the state of your family, for the state of your kids, it's really best to be, stay with their biological mom or dad, something like that. They're like, hey, haven't you been married 6 times? Well, yeah. Well, then I don't want to sit and listen to you then. Now, why is that fallacious? Doesn't mean I'm wrong. It just means that I'm what? A hypocrite. It means I can't live up to my own standard, right? But it doesn't mean what? What doesn't follow?
That is wrong. You're probably just not the best person to hear it from.
Right. That's exactly right. It may hurt my credibility, but what?
But it doesn't necessarily.
Doesn't mean you're wrong, right? So, in fact, I was watching CNN one day, and I was watching these two guys go at it. And the guy says, what is this guy arguing? He's arguing something like that, like men should, treat their wives with respect or whatever, this kind of thing, stay with them, even when it gets tough, something like that. Well, then the host says, essentially what I just said, he said, don't you think, that it's ridiculous for you to sit here and say that when, and then he brought up his past or something. And the guy said, I won't tell you what the guy said yet because it was a brilliant example. He completely turned the tables. But before we say that, he basically tried to discredit his conclusion. How? By showing what? Tu quoque, right? You too, you've done this. Well, it doesn't mean he's false, right? It doesn't mean what he's saying is false. It just means that he's whatever. Well, instead of the guy, obviously he probably hasn't had a philosophy course, but he could think straight. So the first thing he said in response was just ingenious. The guy says, you shouldn't be saying that because you blah, 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 blah. Well, then the guy said to the host, the news anchor guy, he said, well, wait a minute. He said, don't you tell everyone all the time, haven't you started these organizations to kick kids off the streets and not be in gangs and whatever? And the guy was like, yeah. And he said, weren't you in a gang? And the guy was like, well, yeah. He's like, right. So just because you were in a gang doesn't mean that the fact that what you're saying now about kids not being in gangs is what? False. It just means that you screwed up too, right? Now, like Piper said, it may hurt your credibility, right? But it doesn't mean that what? That what you're saying is wrong or false, right? By the way, I haven't been married 6 times. You're going to say something, Jay?
Well, doesn't it kind of depend upon the way in which you're saying it? Like, say, for instance, about the gang is up against you, like, if they were trying to move to would that be very...
Hang on, guys. I'm having a hard time hearing Tavia back here. Sorry, go ahead again.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so I said that, wouldn't that be the best way to get knowledge about something, depending upon the...
Possibly. So you're saying that if you've experienced something, then that gives you more credibility in a sense to say, like, look, I've experienced this, so don't do it because I went through it and it screwed my life up, something like that.
Yeah.
Right, and that may be true, but the 2 quote K fallacy really has more to do with, because that's debatable, right? Even that's debatable. Maybe it gives you a leg up, in offering advice. Maybe it doesn't. But really, this fallacy is really more like you're still doing it right now.
Oh.
Right. So really, the more applicable situation would be, let's say right now I'm lecturing you on being faithful to your spouse or whatever, and I'm being unfaithful to my spouse right now. And they're like, dude, I saw you last night, with, Shalandra over here, and you're telling me right now to be with my right. So now, does that completely does that mess up my credibility in what I'm saying? Yeah, sure it does, absolutely. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that I'm what? Right, I still could be right. Because, again, what did that fallacy do? It diverted the issue, the attention away from the issue and put it upon me or whatever I'm doing wrong or whatever I'm screwing up with. It doesn't have anything to do with what? The issue. The issue has to be judged on what? Its own merits. Remember, that's when we go through all these fallacies, all of these are pushing pushing the attention away from the issue at hand, right? Now, you see why these are so powerful. Remember, before we started talking about these, we were like, yeah, probably in your mind, we're like, I probably don't do any of this stuff. But we do every one of these things, right? We've dismissed conclusions that people are trying to offer based on what? Fallacious styles of reasoning. We've committed genetic fallacy, or we see the genetic fallacy committed. We've seen ad hominems probably on a daily basis. We see this on a daily basis, right? Because now, do you have to say like, well, no, they're not a hypocrite? No, you can say, no, they're a hypocrite. But what they're saying may still what? It still may be right. Right? Something like that. Now, this is one of my favorite. Argumentum ad ignorantium. It means just from ignorance. So, what do you think an example of this is? An argument from ignorance. Go ahead, Piper.
I have one for this one. It's like people who say they see UFOs where they don't know what it is, but then they go, therefore it's aliens from outer space, because what's the other possible reason?
Well, let's make it a little more clear. You're not wrong there, but let's make it a little more clear. It's like saying this. It's like saying like, hey, Karina, have you ever proved there's no UFOs? So then they're probably UFOs then.
Okay.
Right? That's an argument from ignorance. Like you can't draw a conclusion from nothing. That's why I like how this guy says it here. Ignorance proves nothing, and all that can be concluded from nothing is what? Nothing. Right? You can't use it in ignorance. You can't appeal to what you don't know and then to prove something, because what is not knowing? What does that prove? If you're using this, which I just grabbed what? Nothing. I can't use it to prove what? This over here. I don't have anything. Right? People do it all the time, right? Right? Now, you can see this again. Let's go back to controversial subjects. Can you prove that God doesn't exist? Can you prove there's no God? Well, then I see there must be a God. That's an argument from ignorance. It's a terrible argument. Now, you can do the opposite. Can you prove right now to me that there's a God? Right now, can you show me that? Well, no. Well, then there's not a God. Argument. Both of those are what? I've seen both sides use that argument. Terrible argument. Why? Because again, all that can be concluded from nothing is what? Nothing. Now, again, you see how those are persuasive, though? And like, it seems the brilliance of Aristotle, like, yeah, that's a misstep. No, that's a misstep. And then names them. Like, this stuff's used so often and was used so often that Aristotle could say, no. And then names them so that now you have a little tool bag, and somebody does this stuff, you're like, oh, this is argument from ignorance here. There you go. Use this. But you see why this stuff what's another example from an argument from ignorance? Guys, I know y'all know this stuff. Don't make me take my shoes off. That's a non sequitur, right? That's irrelevant. All right. Argument from silence. What's an argument from silence? Argument from silence. What is one? What? 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 What'd somebody say?
I don't know what it is yet.
Argument from silence. I mean, it's pretty. I think it's kind of self-explanatory.
It's one of those where you say something so stupid the whole room just looks at you and stares.
No, it's not that.
You argue about one, and then the other person that you're arguing with, they just don't say anything. It's kind of like you're just talking to yourself.
No, that's a good guess. Go ahead.
Is that where the person doesn't respond, so you already assume what they're saying, and they're saying nothing at all?
No, that's what, when you say nothing, no, that's what she was saying right there.
Really going on.
That's a good guess. But argument from silence is when you try to say something like, I'm trying to give it a good example. I've got a couple, but I don't think they're really that good. Let's see. It's kind of like argument from ignorance. So imagine this. Let's say that I talk about my 3 girls, right? I've got 3 little girls. Well, then you go outside and you're talking about, well, Mr. Crawford was talking about his kids or whatever, and he doesn't have a son. And you're like, well, how do you know that? Well, because he was talking about his 3 girls in there. And you say, well, because he didn't mention the son, so he doesn't have one. Right? Now you say that's an argument from silence. Because just because I didn't say anything about having a son doesn't mean what? Right, it doesn't mean I don't have one. Right? What's another example?
Is that like you're talking about pets, like pets, you mentioned like having a cat, and like, oh, so you don't have a dog?
Right. Right. Are they going around telling everybody like so-and-so, he doesn't like dogs or he doesn't have a dog? Like, well, how do you know? Because he was silent on the issue. But you, again, just kind of like arguing from ignorance. Well, there's nothing there.
So it's
Right.
like an inference from lack of.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. So it's like a bad inference. Now, there's an exception to this. There's called a strong silence. What do you think I might mean by that?
And they frequently would.
Well, no. Strong silence. What do you think I mean by that? Or how might that be an exception? Now, Or look, what if you said, Mr. Carver, will you please, let's say we're talking about my kids again. They're like, will you please, tell us about your familial background or something like that, or your family. And then so I'm like, all right, I have some children. My children are Lily Rain, Lila Spring, and right, those are my kids, all right? And then so I start to talk about my wife. Now, I didn't mention anything about a son, right? Now, say you go and say you write this down. Say you had to write this down for whatever reason for class notes. And then you go and talk about, Russ's kids, and you're like, well, he doesn't have a son. Now, strictly speaking, is that argument from silence? Strictly speaking, yes, but that's a strong silence. Why? Well, no, because you asked me to label out my kids. I write them down, right? I write them down, which is probably pretty indicative of what? That I probably don't have what? A son, right? Now, logically, could there possibly still be that possibility? Sure. But that's an argument from strong silence. So if I'm up here talking about my kids, I write my kids down, names down, and literally put numbers beside their name, like, you can probably infer that I don't have a son based on that, right? Now, there's actually an example. It's pretty funny. Again, we'll use this because we're in the Bible Belt. Every once in a while, you'll get breaking news that comes out about something about, Jesus of Nazareth or whatever. Well, there's an example of one where they talk about Jesus being married. Well, if you're familiar with any of the New Testament passages, any New Testament text, there's a passage in, I believe it's Corinthians, where Paul, the Apostle Paul, lists out reasons why they should be able to be married, something like that. Because somebody's, giving them a hard time, they can be married or not married. Well, he lists out these reasons as to why, essentially this, long story short, this is what scholars have used in these debates back and forth. So you'll see where Paul lists out that the apostles have wives, right? So he says, why should the apostles, the disciples, the guys that follow Jesus, why should they be allowed to have wives? And then you're going to get mad at me for not saying I can't have a wife, whatever the case may be. Well, he's trying to justify that it's okay to have a wife, right? For a follower of Jesus to have a wife. That's what he's trying to justify here, or the disciples of Jesus to have wives. He's trying to justify that. So he talks about all the disciples of Jesus that had these wives, but then he doesn't list who. Right. Now, is that an argument from silence? Could Jesus have had a wife? Logically speaking, yes, right? Because he doesn't list him. But that would be an example of a strong silence. Why? Well, if he's trying to prove that he's okay in having a wife, and he's listing out, or these disciple guys that followed this Jesus guy around as having wives, well, wouldn't it have been conducive to him just to say, oh, and by the way, Jesus had a wife? That would have been conducive for him to say that, right? Now, strictly speaking, is that an argument from silence? Could it logically be possible? Logically speaking, Jesus had a wife. Yeah, it's an argument from silence. But they would say it's a what? Strong silence, right? Something like that. Anyway, that's just probably one of the best examples, or the easiest you can give, being where we live now in our culture. Fallacies of relevance. Argumentum ad misericordiam. Now, again, you hear this all the time. What do you think misericordiam means? Remember, most of this is Latin. Yes, it means Latin. Argumentum ad Latin. Misericordiam means, where do you think the word misery comes from? Right, misery, right? Misericordiam. So it's an appeal to pity. What might an example of that be? What might be an appeal to pity? Right, therefore what? So if one of my students were to say, Mr. Colbert, last night, I was was watching Leno, and my mom came in there and she punched me in the face, and blah blah. Anyway, that's why I didn't get this work done. And if you give me a 0, then I'll fail this course. Does that have anything to do with what? Right, it doesn't have anything to do with that, right? That's an appeal to pity. It doesn't follow that because those things happen, that your grade should be a different thing, right? Or think of it this way. Judge, if we convict this man, like, who's going to raise his children? If you sit here and convict this man of this particular crime, then his wife and his kids and blah, blah, does that have anything to do with whether he did what he did or did not do what he did? Now, should that be taken into consideration? Possibly, right? But that has no bearing as to what? His actual innocence or his actual what? Guilt. It's irrelevant to whether he's innocent or guilty. Should it be taken into consideration? Possibly. But, go ahead.
So with the Brock Turner case, be like an example, like the young.
Remind me of that. Oh, yeah, the swimmer guy.
He's the kid
Right.
who raped a girl behind the dumpster, and he got only 6 months because they were like, oh, he's rich and he's privileged and he won't do well in prison. So he got a way shorter sentence because they made it seem like, well, this poor little guy, not being able to hold himself together because.
No, that's not even the way it was worded. No, what was worded is that his father said for 20 minutes. For 20 minutes of fun, he's going to be thrown in jail for years.
Right. Now, I don't know the details on that case, so I'm not going to remark as to what his guilt or innocence. Why? Because I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what he did or didn't do. Now, obviously, I think we can all agree if someone rapes somebody, he deserves to be punished. I mean, that should be a given, right? At least in our culture. We don't live in the Middle East where that's debatable. But anyway, there's another reason somewhere I'll probably get fired. But I think we can all agree if someone rapes somebody, that's heinous, right? Now, so don't get me wrong when I'm saying I'm not remarking on that because I don't think that. I just don't know. I don't know. I don't know the facts. But if someone were trying to argue that, well, his career or his life will be ruined or whatever, should that be taken into consideration? Possibly. But does that have anything to do with his guilt or innocence? No, it doesn't have anything to do with it, right? That's an appeal to pity, right? Does that have anything to do with the guilt or innocence of the crime? By the way, let's just on a side note here. Does the duration of a crime have anything to do with the guilt of a crime? So, if, like Piper said, if this 20 minutes shouldn't reflect his entire life or whatever. If he did 20 minutes of this crime, or whatever, that shouldn't be. He shouldn't pay for that for 20 years or whatever the case may be. Does time have anything to do with? Does the duration of time have anything to do with crime?
Well, not clear.
What's that?
It's like you're basically in trouble for whatever.
Or should it have anything to do with punishment? The extension of a punishment. Should the duration that it took you to commit a crime should have anything to do with the duration of your punishment? What's that?
It doesn't.
It shouldn't, right? Why? How long does it take to murder someone?
Well, some people drag it out.
Right. But in principle, it can easily be done with what? In less than a second, right? So should your punishment be less than a second? Well, that doesn't seem to follow, right? Now, remember that when we get in a couple of weeks, we get something that's going to be huge. Because if you think that that's a viable principle, that punishment shouldn't necessarily have anything to do with time, then that's probably going to bite you in the butt in about 3 or 4 weeks when we get down to a different argument. Because you won't realize it, but you'll want to jump to that, even though you've already conceded that probably shouldn't be used. All right, so anyway, appeal to pity. Let's go ahead and skip that one. Now, this is an awesome one, too. Argumentum ad populum. What's this one? Now, this is going to be distinguished from argument of consensus gentium, which is argument of the majority. This is going to be argumentum ad populum, which means it has to do with more with like a popular type trend. What's an example of this? if someone appeals to that for their reason that you should take it, right? Look, man, everybody at our college is holding this particular position, right? It could be that, but but in real life, it could be something more. Let's make it more realistic and controversial. Let's make it realistic. Everybody at this college that has anything to do with current events is supporting this particular stance on blah, blah, blah. So, who gives a rat's a? Right? It doesn't matter. The issue is what? The issue is the issue. What are your reasons for the issue, for holding that stance, right? Or what are your reasons against holding that stance? Like, it doesn't matter if everybody in this classroom holds to that particular position, if it's popular within your society. It's irrelevant. Again, that's irrelevant as to the truth of that particular position. See, this is the one that everybody thinks they're free from, and almost everybody's a slave to this right here. All right? Think of whatever your particular position is right now, that you're like your favorite little position that you're holding, and think about how popular that may be right now in our society. Now go back to 1830 and say, all right, your position, look, nobody holds that right now. So that can't possibly be a reason as to give to why you should hold that position, right? Because in one period of time, it may not be popular, and at one period of time, it may be very popular, right? Think of an example of that. What's an example of that? What's an example of that? Go ahead.
I don't know, like saying that pot should be legalized. I don't know, 1950s, you can say that. It's like,
Right, well, they could say nobody believes that. So is that by itself, that has to be an invalid reason for using to prove your argument, right? Or think about slavery, right? Why do you not hold slaves? Nobody does that. What kind of idiot would do? Nobody does that. That's just an argument ad populum. That's not a good reason to not hold slaves, right? Why? Because you could use that in 1830 to support what? Slavery. You go back to 1830, you could say, why should I not hold slaves? Everybody holds slaves. Like, what kind of idiot would believe not to do that? Like, we all do this. Like, what do you do? Like, you see what I'm saying? You can't appeal to the popular trend to support your position, because obviously just one example that we've seen, you could show this to be wrong all kinds of ways, but just one example is just, all right, go to a different time period and try to do that with that particular position, right? All right, let's make it controversial. Let's say that you're, what's a good one? What's a cultural hot button? Oh, here's two good ones. Let's use same-sex marriage. Let's say someone says, why do you not support same-sex marriage? Everybody at this entire university that has half of a college degree realizes that you should support same-sex marriage. That's an argument ad populum. It's irrelevant. Terrible argument, right? Why? Again, go back to 1830. You should support the traditional stance on marriage. Look around. Everybody supports it. Everybody that's graduated from every Ivy League institution supports the traditional stance of marriage in 1830. Who are you to sit here and say that you shouldn't support that? See how they could appeal to the popular majority, right? Just like you can appeal to the popular majority now, right? So if you support or don't support that stance, that better not be your reason. I say crappy reason. Why? It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant what the popular trend in your society is. You have to have a different argument, right? In fact, you have to have what? An actual argument, right? Appealing to the popular trend is, as we say in the South, piss poor, right? It's one word.
Basically, it's just you should believe this because everybody else will be doing this.
That's right.
Hop on the bandwagon.
That's right. That's exactly right. You have to have arguments, right? You have to have reasons. See, again, do you see the brilliance of Aristotle? Remember, he just sat there and noticed all these things. Nothing new under the sun, right? I mean, think about it. 2,500 years ago, this guy's pointing out stuff that people are still doing, are still what? Using. Because they work. Crappy lines of reasoning, what? Unfortunately, what? Work. Consensus gentium. Now, this is very similar to argumentum ad populum, or argument, to the masses kind of thing. This is very similar to that. This is the appeal to the majority. Now, how is this similar, first and foremost? How is this similar to the one we just talked about? You're appealing to some big group outside of yourself, right? Now, the other has more to do with what? As you two were just saying.
This one's just because a majority of people.
Right. The other may not necessarily be a majority, right? It just may be widely popular. It may be a very popular trend, but it still may not be the majority opinion, right? Now, consensus gentium just is what? The actual majority. What are some examples of that? We could even go back to our other example, right? We could just say, let's imagine the majority of the population believes one way or the other. You still can't use that for what? Right. You still can't use that for your argument, right? Because why? You could just go back in time and try to use the same argument and see it supports the exact opposite conclusion, right? And if your argument supports contradictory positions, if your argument supports the exact opposite conclusion at a different time and place, then that's a really bad argument, right? In fact, it's not even an argument, it's a fallacy, right? What might be another example of this besides the ones we already talked about?
Would it be like you're an atheist and you stumble into a church or something, and all these other people, like in the church, like you believe in God, there is a God, like, well, why should I believe it? Like, oh, because we all believe it.
Yeah, I mean, so if right, so or you don't have to be in the church. You could just say, strictly speaking, the world, right? So 90-something% of the population believes in God, right? You don't even have to be in the church. 90-something% of the world's population believes in God. So if you were to say, you need to believe in God, why do I should believe in God? Because 90-something% of the world's population believes in God. Right, that's in consensus gentium, right? Now, why is that a terrible argument? Right. Well, let's go to the year 2160. Let's say that particular time that, let's say, atheism is dominant as far as the belief system goes. And what if someone says, why should I be an atheist? And they say, because 99% of this world population doesn't believe in God. You just proved the exact opposite of your conclusion earlier, right? With the exact same argument. Well, argument there in parentheses is fallacy. It won't work, right? You have to have what? You have to have reasons as to why you shouldn't believe in God, right? Or you should have reasons as to why what? You should believe in God, right? But do we use these things all the time? Do you see society use this kind of stuff all the time, right? In fact, well, we'll get to that in a second. Appeal to authority. Sweet Moses, this is probably the worst one, or the one that makes me the most mad. Because this comes across as the most quote unquote intellectual type of objection, even though it's just as fallacious as any other type of objection.
Oh.
What's an example of this? Go ahead.
Like you're referencing an article on Galileo, and it's like a scholarly article, and it's still like bullshit. It's still going to be wrong, even if you have like all of these like educated people writing it and putting it together.
Well,
it looks good.
Well, possibly. That's why I said I draw a distinction between the above and a false and inappropriate authority. So if you have an appeal to authority, I would say really what you're really looking for is an appeal to an inappropriate authority.
Okay.
So why would I say? So what do I mean by that?
I'm a dietitian, not an MD.
Right, or even worse. Like, what if I'm sitting here talking about, well, let's go to hot button cultural issue examples. Because they're just easy, right? Everybody has an opinion on them, and they just instantly rile you up, right? So let's use those. Who remembers Bill Nye the Science Guy? Right, I do. All right, he seems like an intelligent individual, right? I mean, he is, right? But then he gets on the internet and starts making arguments, or not arguments, but basically what? Not arguments, but he starts saying stuff against what position? His degree is, he's an engineer, right? He's got a bachelor's in engineering. So
That's all.
he may have a master's in engineering too.
He
So.
have like
He does have a
PhD.
Right, but he gets on he gets on popular like channels and what argues what? I mean, one of them he argues particularly against, say, the abortion issue, right? And then so people quote Bill Nye as if he's an authority on what? That's an inappropriate appeal to authority. It doesn't matter what Bill Nye thinks, right? Now again, like whatever your particular stance is on the abortion issue, you probably should use as your sources and your citations for your argument who? Right, biologists or philosophers who deal with that particular issue, right? Now, would it be the genetic fallacy to say Bill Nye's wrong? Yeah, right, because he may be right, but you can't quote him as your what? Right, because that's not his field, right? So these are usually easy issues to talk about because they're just so easily recognizable. So when someone, say, quotes Einstein in relation to certain beliefs on God or not, Einstein's not a philosopher or a theologian. What is he? Right, yeah. Or a theoretical physicist or something like that, right? He deals with it's his field, the study of philosophy, religion, and theology. No. So if you're trying to prove some argument in regard to God's existence, because I've seen both sides use Einstein, if you're trying to use Einstein for your side, you're doing this right here, and it's an appeal to an inappropriate authority. Now, again, is he wrong because he's not a philosopher of religion or a theologian? Maybe or maybe not, but that's not who you quote what? To prove your case. Because basically, you're just trying to ride the coattails of his credentials, right? Well, Einstein says, so? Right? What are his arguments? Right? Yeah, that would be the worst example of, yeah, I mean, it is. No, I don't mean your worst example. I'm saying like that would be like the bottom of the barrel of somebody trying to say, well, Wikipedia says, right? So if someone's, I'm just trying to understand. So if someone were to say, to make what you're saying right, if someone were to say, well, Wikipedia says, blah, 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 like.
So anybody can get
Not anymore. They kind of locked the page now.
Wikipedia is still really bad. I get so frustrated reading Wikipedia stuff.
You've never seen an edit notification that it goes through?
Dude, I have an account where I can get on Wikipedia and edit stuff. And then like I can edit stuff on Wikipedia and put in what I know is 100% like right information on that particular issue. I'll go back a week later, someone has re-edited my edits, and you're just like, this place is good.
I remember.
Right, you can roll it back to previous edits.
I was in 8th grade one time, and they did.
One time, hopefully one time.
One time.
I was in eighth grade 3 consecutive school years.
Place before they had page locks, I edited the entire entry for Spain to say that it was founded by Fidel Castro. And it was up there for like 3 weeks before somebody noticed that Spain was edited.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. It's a pretty good prank. I'm a fan of good pranks. Now there's probably somebody running around quoting, well, Wikipedia says that Spain was founded by Fidel Castro, which shows exactly why you probably shouldn't quote Wikipedia. So anyway, have any of you guys seen this right here? What's another example of this? What's another example of this? Let's say my little girl, I helped her with her math homework last night. And let's say she goes back to school and the teacher says, number 5 is wrong. And she says, my dad teaches college courses. He is very, very smart. Number 5 is not wrong. Well, it's a math problem, right? Like, because I teach philosophy to college folks, that doesn't mean that I'm also a what? A math genius, right? Now, does that mean I'm wrong? No, I still could be right, but she can't appeal to her dad, the philosophy teacher, who she thinks is very intelligent, in order to do what? Math problems, right? I'm out of my field. That's not my discipline, right? Now, hopefully I'm not going to miss a first grade math problem. But you see how that would be an inappropriate appeal to authority, right? Now, this is a good one. Argumentum ab annis. I won't say it that way. Chronological snobbery. What's a good argument on it? What's a good example of this one? You're on the right track, but that's not necessarily it. That would be more of an argument ad hominem, right? Because you're talking about their specific age. What's argumentum ad annis because of age? Chronological. What does chronological mean? Well, what type of order? Like time,
Logical order.
right? Because you can have,
In order of what happened.
because you can have a logical order that's not necessarily chronological, right? Chronological order has to do with what? Time, right? Not necessarily just order and time. So let's go back to our earlier example, because these are just the easy ones. Dude, you can't possibly hold to that stance of marriage, let's say the traditional stance. That's so Victorian. That's so post 18th century.
So like the
Chronological snobbery.
is the age of the point itself you're making.
Right. If you're basically trying to say that it's the 21st century, man. Right. Get with the times. It's 21st. Who holds that view? That's what? Chronological snobbery. Like, the times have nothing to do with what? The issue. Right? It's completely what? Irrelevant. Right? Because again, you could just do the reverse, right? You could do the reverse. Get with the times, man. Everybody has slaves. It's the 18th century. Everybody owns people. Right? Right? So you can't use that to appeal to your... But notice how everyone does this in what? Right, in their own time. But everybody sees it as stupid to have done then. But what do they do now? It's the 21st century, man. You got to let people love who they want to love. That's irrelevant. Now, you may believe that, which is fine, right? But you have to what? Have an argument for that position, right? It's the 21st century, man, blah, blah. It doesn't matter if it's the freaking 13th century. The issue is what? The issue is the issue, right? Whatever your stance is on, say, any of those cultural hot-button topics, you have to have what? Arguments and reasons, right? But we see how it's easy. Is it already that time? We see how it's easy to what? Just to appeal to what? Fallacious types of reasons, age being one of them. It's just irrelevant. You're an idiot. I'm just kidding. You're not an idiot, but you're making what?
Idiotic.
Right, idiot type. Right, there you go. That's a better way to say it. I was going to say idiotic type of arguments. You just simplify it. Simplify. That's not even a word. Argumentum ad futurus, to the future. Now, again, I've seen both sides of the. It's so fun just to talk about the God thing, because these are, again, they're just always so easy right off the bat to see how people use these on both sides. What is an argumentum ad futurus, to the future? Appeal to the future. What are arguments? What's an example of this? What's that?
Think of your children. They may not have that.
Not necessarily, because that should be a valid concern, right? No, it doesn't matter.
Jump on the bandwagon or listen to me, because in a couple of years this is going to happen.
The stock market.
You're on the right track. You're on the right track. So here's how both sides use this argument right here. Here's how both sides of the God debate question use this argument. Which one do you want to hear first? The bad God side or the bad atheistic side? Which one do you hear first?
Same book.
This is like say someone believes in God, they're like, oh yeah, well you don't believe in God, well if you die and you wake up in hell because you didn't believe in God, like saying in the future, and then like if atheists would say like, well what if you were wrong, you die, there's nothing, there's not like heaven or whatever.
Almost, you got the God side pretty much right, but not the atheist side. So the God side would be something like, you don't believe in God? No, I don't believe in God. Well, then you just wait till Jesus shows up. Wait till the rapture, see what's happening. Right? Now, which may or may not be true, but that can't possibly be what? You can't use it for your argument, because all you can use for your argument is what? What we have right now, the evidence that we have right now. You can't appeal to the future, right? Now, what's the bad side of that? The atheistic side of that? Wait till the devil shows up. No, because they would be admitting that what? The devil's real, and probably can't be an atheist, right? What's that? Right, yeah, but what I thought does anybody know what the atheist side of that same argument might be? What's the atheistic side of that same argument? At least one version of that. Well, I don't care that your aunt so-and-so was completely 100%, paralyzed, and then somebody prayed and she was healed instantly. Just wait. One day science will show why that happened. Argument to the future. You have to go with what? What's that?
Do people say things like that?
Oh, yeah. People say all the time. Like, you'll hear a more sophisticated version of that. It'll say something like, science has always shown us where theology thought they had this. Science has always come along and shown us it was really not theology. It was really not God. It was just science. So just wait, and science will figure that out too.
Well, some people also said the opposite, which is because science changes so often, therefore don't trust science.
Oh, well, that's not the opposite, because one is an appeal to the future. One is just a what? One just tries to pull the carpet out from under the methodology of science itself, right? So the reverse of that would be, well, you just wait till Jesus shows up, right? One of them, and then the opposite side of that is you basically just wait till science shows up, right? Does that make sense? You have to go with what you have right now for the evidence. You can't appeal to the future. One is called God of the gaps. One is called science of the gaps, right? You have to stay right here and look at what the evidence is right now. You can't constantly appeal to the future, hoping that the future will prove your position. Because when all the data comes in the future, it may what? It may prove your position what? Wrong, right? So you can't appeal to the future to support your position. In a way, that's kind of like ignorance, right? It's kind of like appeal to ignorance. You can't appeal to what we don't necessarily know yet. You have to appeal to what we do know. Well, right. In one sense, in one way, it kind of just begs the question that you're already right. Right? Well, that's what you're trying to prove right now, that you are right. When you're appealing to the future, you're just assuming that you are. But that's what we're trying to prove right now. Right. Which perfectly goes into this. Begging the question, which is just a circular argument. What is a circular argument? Like we said, in a way, that sort of is, in a way, right? Because you're just assuming, in a way, that you're already right, and you're appealing to the future, saying the future will support you. Well, you don't know that. That's what we're trying to prove right now. Now, but petitio principii really is a circular argument begging the question, a little bit different. What's the terrible God side of the version of this?
I can do that.
All right.
That's God's real because it's in the Bible, and the Bible's right because God wrote it.
Yeah.
Right, or let's do it a little more understandable. The Bible is the Word of God. How do you know the Bible is the Word of God? Because it says it is. That's a circular argument, right? Now, does that mean that the Bible's not the Word of God? Maybe or maybe not, but that is the worst argument ever, right? Because why? What could someone else do? No, the Quran is the Word of God. Well, how do you know that? Because the Quran says it is. Right? Well, now how do you judge between the two? You can't, right? It's just assuming what it's trying to prove, right? It just assumes what it's trying to prove. Now, what is another example of that? A begging question, circular argument. I can give you another example. Besides those, think of one. Begging the question, circular argument. What was the one we were saying earlier? That we were singing, we could put those two choruses together. Yeah, I'm gonna bring my one day. I'm gonna bring my drums and my guitar to class.
Are you actually going to want to carry all that into?
I love you.
Yeah, I would too. If you really wanted to do it, you probably get screamed at.
Circular argument. What's another example of circular argument? It's in my nursery, baby nursery. My wife's mad about it. What's another example of a circular argument? Oh, I know one that we could talk about. To be fair to both sides, if the bad circular argument on the theistic side, the God side, is the whole, how do you know the Bible's the Word of God? Because the Bible says it's the Word of God. That's a terrible argument. Don't use it. The reverse of that, on the other side, would be something like going off when we were saying earlier about somebody being paralyzed or whatever, would be to say, like, a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature, and we therefore know that the laws of nature can't be violated, so therefore miracles can't happen. That's a circular argument, right? Because you're assuming what? You're assuming your conclusion, right? You've already assumed it. Well, yeah, just by definition, if miracles are a violation of the laws of nature and they can't be violated, well, then by definition, what can't possibly ever happen? A miracle. But that's the argument, right? That's what you're trying to figure out. Can it happen or can it not happen? Well, if you just define it right out of existence, right out of the gate, then what can't ever happen? The miracle, right? Just like if you define God's word, if you define the Bible as God's word, if you define that as God's word, then what is it? By definition, God's word, right? So those are both bad examples. All right, let's see if we can squeeze one more. How many do we have for? We'll have to do all of these before we leave. I might have to just send you a copy of these because these are just all so good. Straw man. All these are just like, you just really need these. All right. Anything before we leave real quick? Anybody not see their grade that was here? Jatavia, you got here, you might want to see yours, right? Everybody else, you've seen your grade, right? Oh, wait, I got to tell you what to read before you come back. Let's see. Does anybody have a copy of their syllabus like right with you right now so I don't have to pull it up? Dang it. All right, don't leave. I just want to tell you what to read real quick.